Good morning, lovely people. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to another day. Court disorder in the court is in session. Never fear. Your host, Lynn, the tired person, is here. Yes, I am here, and so are you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, thank you. Um, okay, so yesterday in the chat, a lot of people were talking about how you wanted me to get that. Well, I'll save it for a surprise for later because I got something you guys were asking for. Let me make sure I have the. Yeah, I am not muted. For some reason, NBC Boston is not live streaming this today. That's where I was live streaming this from yesterday. Oh, I got some coffee. I definitely got my coffee right here. It's nice and warm, and um, I'll get over it. It's a temporary feeling. You just have to get past it. Got to push past it. I hope you all are doing okay. Oh, and that's right. Happy Valentine's Day. Even no matter who you are, no matter whether you're in a relationship or not, it is a Hallmark greetings holiday for sure. It's one of those, hey, let's create a holiday where to make sure that people say I love you. So anyway, no, happy Valentine's Day. I'm sure that a lot of you are celebrating various anniversaries of things. A lot of people get engaged and married on Valentine's Day. Um, I am one of them, but I'm not married anymore. But anyway, so Valentine's Day was a special day. Um, so Caroline, I noticed that you mentioned that. Look up Anthony Baderos. You're shocked. I'll have to look it up during a break. Um, what are you? Is there? What are you shocked about, Caroline? His record, or where he comes from? Is there like something major? Sandy says, I just canceled all my errands I was planning today. I realized it's Valentine's Day. Too many full. Yeah, that's true. Oh, that sucks, Caroline. That sucks. Yeah. Oh, that's cool, Stephanie. Happy anniversary. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day. Um, it looks like they're not quite as on time this morning as they usually are. So, why don't we get a little, excuse me, hold on. A little humor for our morning before things get started. Oh, that's cute, Mayla's mom. Here we go. Just a little something to get us started to realize that there are funny things like this in the world.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the
Oh,
video
courts.
settings.
Wait.
You might want to take, take
We're
a look.
trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I
I switched. I switched back to court, but we'll get to watch that later. That really is a freaking hilarious. Yeah, I keep trying to look at whether it's real or not, and it is. It's real. It kind of looks like a Saturday Night Live sketch, but man, that thing is real.
All rise for the jurors, please.
Yeah. So I'm really curious who they're going to be calling today. It's five. Is it 5 months today? Oh, congratulations, Claus. That's amazing. One day at a time, babe. That's amazing. I already have. I've been showing that one. Sandy says I have that loaded up.
Seated?
That is hilarious. Well, that sounds like fun. A stereo upgrade. That's awesome. Lil Red. Hey, Johnny. So, who are they going to call today? You know, I thought it was interesting how they interspersed witnesses yesterday. They went from, you know, fairly dry, kind of technical, like, um, trial work, of setting timelines and things like that, then to, familial relations that were, and also Anthony Badero. This is the DNA. I forgot that. Of course, this is the DNA expert who is still on the stand. A real expert.
When we left off yesterday afternoon, at the end of the day, we had been speaking about the DNA profile that you were able to see on specifically the state's exhibit, the pink toothbrush. Do you recall those questions?
I do.
All right. And I believe you had given us a statistic recently about a 1 in 100 sextillion.
That sounds correct.
Okay. And so if you could just clarify one more time for the jury to understand, what does that 1 in 100 sextillion mean in terms of the profile, and comparing the profile that was seen on that toothbrush to the known profiles you were able to generate from Adam Montgomery and Crystal Sorey?
So that's 100 sextillion times the more likely that toothbrush came from a child from those two particular people than from other random people.
And specifically a female child from those two people, correct?
Correct. It was a female profile.
All right. And so in that profile, and one thing, if you could please explain for the jurors in terms of some of the things when you're looking certainly for differences between males and females when you have an X versus a Y chromosome. If you could explain that to the jurors, what the difference there is.
For the gender?
Yes, please.
Right. So males have an X and a Y, so that everyone is going to get an X from their mother because females only have two X's to give. So when an egg is formed, it's going to have an X regardless. There's no choices. When sperm are formed, half of them are going to get X's and half are going to get Y's from the father. So when they join, you're either going to have an XX and produce a female, or you're going to have an X and a Y and produce a male.
And so with regards to the profile on the toothbrush, because it was identified as being one of a gender female. There was no Y that you saw on that profile. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
It's separate from the toothbrush and being able to come up with that profile and see it there. Separate from that, did you also test a number of different swabs or cuttings
I
as
did.
part of your work?
I'm sorry. I did. Yes.
And with regards to those, I'd like to ask you about a couple of specific ones, and by the initials that they came to you under. Specifically, I'd like to ask you about swabs that you received that were labeled JMT 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
Do you recall being asked to test those?
They sound correct. I do believe one of my reports had those numbers. I don't
If you had a
have them
chance to look at
memorized.
that report, would that help?
That would be lovely.
I know you
Thank
said yesterday, I believe you said you write over 60 of these per year. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, you may.
So I'm handing you a document. Can you tell me what that document is?
Yes, it's my January 19th, 2022 report. And that's what it is. It's 3 pages of report.
When you generated that particular report, was the information fresh in your mind from the work that you just completed on the swaps?
Yes.
So I've asked you to review it for a quick moment. And then afterwards, I'm going to ask you a series of questions about a couple of different swabs that you tested on that day. Okay?
Okay. Just the JMT 1 through 4 swabs?
Correct.
Okay.
And I see you're looking up. So does that help refresh your recollection on your testing on those 4?
That does.
I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about the results that you got from those particular swabs. And I'd like to start with swabs JMT 1, 2, and 3. Did you get any results from looking at those swabs?
Right. So 1, 2, and 3, I did get results. They were from more than one person, but there was so little DNA that they were insufficient to be able to make any comparisons. Remember yesterday I talked about when you have a profile, it has to be good enough quality to be able to compare it. And if it doesn't reach a particular threshold, then we can't do any comparisons. That's what happened with those 3 swabs.
And is that the same for all 3 of those swabs? There was just insufficient DNA in all 3 of them.
Yes.
When you do have a situation like that where it just is insufficient, does that mean that you can draw any sort of conclusions from it one way or another, that it's definitely one individual or definitely not, or that it compares to an unknown person versus a known? Can there be any conclusions drawn?
So we can, usually we can tell, at least if it looks like there was one person or more than one person, which in this case for those, all 3 of those, I said they were more than one person. And sometimes we can tell if there's an X or an X and a Y, and we can tell if at least one of those people is male or female. But in this particular instance, there wasn't enough information to even tell the gender.
And let's stick with those 3 swabs if we can for a minute, JMT 1, 2, and 3. For those swabs, when you did your testing on this, that was testing for DNA analysis, not for general serology. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you don't know, or let me ask you, did you know what sort of substance might be on these swabs or might have been swabbed here?
So I was, when I get the file, I do have information, some cases, some I don't. For these, I did by then know that they were believed to have blood on them.
And with regards to, are you aware of whether or not they went through serological testing at the lab?
So those swabs did not.
They did not. Okay. And I believe you yourself, you've done serology at the lab a couple of different times, correct?
Correct.
All right. And with regards to that, what's the name of the test that the lab does for testing for the presence of blood?
Castle-Mayer.
I'd like to move now to JMT4, that last swab. Did you get a different result on JMT4 as compared to 1, 2, and 3?
I did.
And what did you see on JMT4?
I got a profile from one person and it was a male.
It was from male,
Male, yes.
not female.
No.
And let me go ahead and ask you, were there several other swabs that you tested in this matter?
There were.
And from those other swabs, generally from all of them, were you able to come up with any other known profiles or a profile that you saw on any of those that was one that could be compared specifically?
I believe there was one other sample somewhere that had a female profile, if I remember correctly. I don't remember if it was a cutting or a swab of something.
If you had a chance to look at the rest of your reports, do you think that might refresh your recollection as to where that may be?
Yes.
Let me hand those to you, Ms. Somber. That particular one that you talked about, that's not within the report that you were reviewing a moment ago, dated January 19th.
No.
Do you recognize the three documents I've given you there?
Yes.
And what are they?
My February 1st, 2022 report, my February 20, oh, sorry, they're out of order. A June 29th, 2022, and a February 21st, 2023 report.
Would looking at those reports possibly help refresh your recollection as to the other profile that you were able to see?
Yes. Yes.
Feel free for a moment to review.
I think I was incorrect. There was a hair that was female, but it was not actually good enough for comparison purposes.
Okay, so there was a hair that you looked at, but it was not suitable for comparison purposes.
Right. And everything else, it does look like you're correct. They were not anything that I could compare.
Let me ask, with the work that you did do in this case, at any point did you make anything called a cutting or take a separate sample out of what you had been provided?
I did not.
You did not. Let me just have a moment, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
Ms. Weingel, one more quick series of questions. With regards to the known profiles you were able to develop, not only the one for Etta Montgomery, but also the one for Crystal Sorey, and then with this profile that you were able to see on the toothbrush, the one in 100 sextillion. With those three profiles, what were you able to do with that information? Is there a place where that goes, or is there a place where that type of information is shared?
The only place that we would have to share anything would be with the national database, and I believe the profile from the toothbrush was sent to them for the missing persons portion of the database. That's my recollection. That was not something I did, but I believe that is what happened. And then the profile from Adam Montgomery was put in.
Was put into that
the
database.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Swingle. I don't have any further questions for you. I believe defense counsel will have a few.
Okay.
It'll be interesting
you.
to see how the defense
Good
tries
morning.
to tear this.
How are
apart.
you? Fine. I do have a few questions, and you clarified a few things for me. Sure, if you don't mind. Okay. Just let me know when you need to look at a report, and then the jury will understand that you're reviewing your report when you testify.
Okay.
So one of your first duties, you said that you had two sort of roles in this case.
For the most part, I did just DNA, but there was one report that I wrote that was serology.
And that was in the beginning of January of 2022.
That sounds correct. I believe I started it actually on the 9th of January that year.
Okay, and that was because A whole bunch of stuff went to another criminalist who normally does serology. So you checked a few things to get them done quickly.
Correct. So all the evidence came in, and they were asked to rush it, and it was a Friday, which is when they all happened to happen. And because I was planning to come in on Sunday, he did what he could on Friday, and on Sunday I was tasked with trying to get these couple items in particular tested and started for DNA.
Okay, and so one of the things don't simply, let's take swabs where people think the collector thinks it's possible blood. Okay?
Yes.
Somebody at a scene has collected a swab and thinks it's possible blood. Doesn't go right in for a DNA analysis, right?
Not usually, no.
Okay. It often goes to serology for intermediate test to see if there's a presumption that it's blood.
Correct.
And if it turns out that it's presumptively blood, it goes on to the DNA lab.
Correct.
And it may turn out to be DNA and it may not.
Correct.
And then if it is DNA, you may be able to get a profile or you may not.
Correct.
And if you get a profile, it may be sufficient to compare to a known sample or it may not.
Correct.
Okay. So these are all the steps that are generally happening in the lab in a case where swabs and samples go to the DNA lab.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, and when you did your serology testing in this case, and I think the numbers on them were swabs BEO5 and BEO6,
Yes, they are the correct numbers.
okay? And one of those swabs was negative for blood.
I believe they were both negative for blood.
Okay, one of those swabs was negative for blood and sent on to the DNA lab.
They were both
Okay.
negative and both sent for DNA.
All right, so let's talk about, well, let's do them both together. You're right. BEO5 or 6 was negative for blood but sent on to the DNA lab.
Both of them were negative for blood and were sent to the DNA lab, yes.
Okay, but BEO5,
Those are the correct numbers.
BEO5 was
Yes.
negative for blood and sent to the DNA lab.
Yes.
And then BEO6, you actually got a little more information in your lab, right?
In the DNA portion,
In the DNA portion.
that's the report that he took away. So I think so. But it was not, again, it was still not comparable.
Do you have 19 with you? Okay, so I have messed this up and I don't mean to repeat, but I'm going to back up so that we have it. BEO 5 and 6 were both negative for blood, but sent to the DNA lab.
Correct.
Okay. And at the DNA lab, you got DNA from BEO6?
I got nothing at all from 6.
Okay.
BO6.
So
correct.
here's something that was sent to the lab, found not to be blood, but still sent on to DNA in BEO6, right?
Yes,
And then in BEO6, there's no DNA.
correct.
And then BEO5 is sent to the lab, found not to be blood, but forwarded on for DNA analysis. And you did find DNA.
I found a small amount of DNA, yes.
And in that small amount of DNA, you found presence of more than one,
That's correct.
and you don't know how many.
Correct.
And you found the presence of at least one of those multiple 2 or more DNAs was male.
Correct.
And the presence of male DNA limited your ability to see female DNA.
That's correct.
So that that mixture could have been 2 males,
Yes.
could have been multiple males,
Yes.
could have been a male and a female,
Yes.
could have been multiple males and females.
Yes.
You just have no idea.
Correct.
So, and I want to talk about some of the reasons that might lead to that insufficiency determination.
Okay.
DNA can degrade over time,
Yes.
and you may 2 years later find DNA or not.
Correct.
And in this case, when you were talking about JMT 1 through 4, were you aware of where those swabs were obtained from?
I don't remember if I did know that at the time when I first started them. I'm not positive if I knew or not.
Okay, the jury has heard some testimony about the collection of those items from a trunk of a Sebring. Does that sound right?
I know that there were definitely samples from the trunk of a car tested, so that would make sense, yes.
Okay. Now, if DNA is out in an, what do you call the environment that you hold the swab in? Not quarantined.
Room temperature?
Okay.
What are you,
When
I'm
you
not
store
sure.
it so it won't degrade.
Right, so they're just stored usually in envelopes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And are they put in refrigerators or any kind of special environment?
No.
Okay. So when you store it, the DNA can degrade?
It can, but if it's just at room temperature, usually it doesn't.
Okay. But if DNA is out in temperature that could go from very, very hot for a while to very, very cold for a while, it can be subject to degrading.
Correct.
And but at the same time, it can be subject to those swings in temperatures for years and not fully degrade, right?
That's true.
So sometimes some DNA exposed to those extremes in temperatures, you may end up with nothing, or you may end up with something.
That's true.
Because DNA can actually stay around for a long time.
It can.
And it is why even after years have passed, you test for DNA and or blood.
Yes.
Okay. Now the JMT 1, 2, and 3 had the DNA, but they were not sufficient quantity.
Those three, oh, sorry if I look,
Sure,
the report again.
please.
1, 2, and 3, right. I could tell that there was more than one person, but that was all that I could tell about those 3.
Okay, so again, we have that multiple that you had in BEO5, right?
Correct.
And it could have been a male and a male?
I don't know anything about the gender for that sample, whether it was male and male, male and female, female, male, etc.
All of those choices apply because there's only 2 genders that are under consideration.
Correct.
Okay. And could have been all of the same gender,
Could have been.
could have been all of mixed
Okay,
gender,
Sparkle.
Correct.
could have been 2, could have been more than 2.
It could. Generally, our wording is if we say more than 1, it usually means we think it's 2. If we think it's more than 2, we generally would write more than 2, etc. But when it's very low, it is difficult to tell for sure.
Okay. So
Hi,
yeah,
Deb and
could have been
PA.
multiple, but what you saw is more than likely 2.
Correct, because it's more than 1, and I did not write that it's more than 2.
Okay.
So yes.
And you tested a fair amount of swabs in your DNA analysis capacity, right?
Correct.
And they were swabs that had the initials MER and various numbers after that.
Correct.
And the jury has learned that the initials are usually the person that collects it, and the number is kind of the order that it gets collected in, right?
That is correct, yes.
So a fair amount went through serology, something was deemed appropriate to send on for DNA, and then it was tested by you.
Correct.
And you said JMT you knew was from the trunk, or you believed was from the trunk of Sebring,
Correct. I knew there were several things from a trunk of a car, yes.
and nothing from the interior of the car, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any objection?
I think not at this time. There's one more criminalist, perhaps, and then I will give an answer.
Yeah, that's a no.
Yeah.
All right, you may step down. You're not excused from this. evening. Okay, thank you.
That's one of the things that leads me to believe that this defense is just kind of grasping at straws, is that that's the third witness that she has said, no, I want to keep them on call. So it's like they're like, I can't let you go. I just can't quite let this one go yet because I might find something. You know what I mean? I mean, they don't. It feels like they don't exactly know what direction they're going in, or I could be wrong. So let's see who this witness is.
Yeah, sorry.
Looks like law enforcement, maybe.
Good morning.
To push that.
Good morning, new people who are joining us. Please remember to hit the thumbs up. Yeah, exactly, Lil Red. Could be Kathy. Looks like we'll be getting some show and tell with this witness. Probably because it's law enforcement. I'm making assumptions, but
Morning, Detective Riley.
yeah,
How are you
detective.
today?
Doing well. Good morning.
And sorry, I just referred to you as a detective. Mr. Riley, can you begin by stating and spelling your full name for the record?
Scott Riley, SCOTT RILEY,
And what city or state do you live in?
Manchester, New Hampshire.
How long have you lived in Manchester?
On and off my whole life.
About how old are you?
I'll be 53 this year.
Mr. Riley, how are you presently employed?
Employed, but I work for myself. I'm a consultant for, I do some work for some civil law firms.
Is that what kind of work is that?
Interviewing.
Investigations?
No investigations, just interviews. I just do like a forensic type interview.
Do you do anything else currently?
I still work at the police department part-time.
And let's talk about that. When you say you still work at the police department part-time, what police department is that?
Manchester.
And can you just walk the jurors through your experience working at the Manchester Police Department?
So you want me to start with my first police department and then move into Manchester, or just Manchester?
Manchester.
So Manchester, I went there in 2007, and I spent, I think, maybe 7.5 years in Manchester in patrol, doing all kinds of different assignments, bike patrol, motorcycles, stuff like that. And then I went into
He's a low talker.
juvenile division as a school resource officer for a couple of years, and then I spent the remaining almost 8 years as a juvenile detective.
What kind of things did you do as a patrol officer?
Respond to urgent calls, anything from traffic stops to urgent, could be bank robberies, anything, whatever is needed at the time.
And is it pretty typical for officers that start at the Manchester Police Department to work patrol for some period of time?
Yes, it is.
You mentioned going into the juvenile division and working as a school resource officer.
I did.
How long specifically did you do that for?
2.5 years. If I recall, I don't really know exact. I think it was maybe 2.25 years, 2.5 years, somewhere around there.
And you also mentioned eventually becoming a detective in the juvenile division.
I did.
What did you do? What were your assignments and duties in that role?
Investigating crimes either against or by juveniles.
And how long were you a detective with that division?
I was just shy of 10 years by a few months.
Earlier, you mentioned prior law enforcement experience prior to the Manchester Police Department. Can you tell the jurors what that is?
I worked at Hooksett Police Department. That's where I was originally hired in 04. And I worked there from 04 to 07. Then I transferred over to Manchester.
Mr. Riley, did you graduate from the New Hampshire Police Academy?
I did.
What year did you graduate?
The 135th Academy, and it was in 2004.
I want to switch gears, Officer Riley, or I'm sorry, Mr. Riley.
I'm still an officer, so it's okay.
Okay. Can you, were you assigned duties in your capacity as a law enforcement officer in the investigation of a missing child, Harmony Montgomery?
I was.
And can you just describe generally your role and involvement on that case?
It began with everybody pretty much in the division because when it first came in, it was fast paced. They kind of grabbed everybody they could to work on it. So the assignments in the beginning were kind of just, they'd have like a morning meeting and they would decide, you're doing this today. There was nothing specific. And then it morphed into, I was assigned monitoring jail calls, jail mail, jail messages. I was involved in some interviews. I mean, I didn't have like a specific assignment. Whatever was needed, they just assigned it to us and kind of we ran with it.
Did you say it was all hands on deck?
It was in the beginning, yes.
I mentioned a missing persons investigation. Did that change at some point during the course of your involvement?
It did. Yeah.
What did it change to?
It changed to more of a homicide investigation.
Do you recall when your involvement began on the Harmony Montgomery case?
I believe it was the 2 days after Christmas, so it would have been the 12/27 of 2021, if I recall correctly.
At some point in the investigation, did you and the officers with the Manchester Police Department receive information pertaining to the Families in Transition Shelter, FIT shelter here in town?
We did.
And what led you? What information did you receive that led you to that shelter?
I wasn't part of there was an interview that was conducted and information was obtained that maybe that the child was placed in that apartment for a period of time.
You mentioned an interview being conducted. Was that with Kayla Montgomery?
It was.
During your time with the Manchester Police Department, were you tasked with processing that room?
I was.
When did you process that room?
I believe that was June 4th of 2022, if I recall correctly.
Can you describe your response to the Families in Transition Shelter that day?
We were told to go out there and we were going to complete a search of the apartment. I mean, the crime scene van was involved. It wasn't my case, so I didn't really have any of the planning. I was just kind of, let's go. You're going to help process the scene, and we obviously went out there.
So you mentioned receiving information pertinent to your investigation that may be at the Families in Transition Shelter. Did you, subsequent to that, after getting that information, did you provide a subpoena for documents to the Families in Transition Shelter?
I did.
If I can approach, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Sorry, y'all. I'm looking at the docket right now because I also am curious to see what they have filed to say who's testifying. Here it is, defendant's witness list. I'll show it to you. I'll show it to you momentarily.
You may.
So, Mr. Riley, I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 93 for identification. I'm just going to ask that you review those items. And specific attention to this page and this page. Are you aware of what those documents?
I am. I've never actually read these, but I am aware of what they are. Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, the state moves to strike idea of State's Exhibit 93 and mark the scope.
You just do it.
Look how awkward their body language is when they're interacting with each other, the the state and the prosecution. So here is the list, the from the motion that the defense filed. They have requested 2 witnesses, and the first one, Michelle Rafferty, has already testified for the state. So it looks like they might try to call her back. And then Michael Harju, Hillsborough County House of Correction. So I guess it's a cellmate you guys have been talking, or someone who's in prison with him. It also says, in addition, Mr. Montgomery hereby gives notice that he includes as potential defense witnesses all witnesses named in the state's witness list, whether civilian, law enforcement. So, and I went through the long list of state's witnesses yesterday from Twitter. I don't see any updates to that. Something's happening in chat. Soulmate. Well, your phone knows that it's Valentine's Day, Mayla's mom. Yes, his soulmate is coming out of prison. Speaking of soulmates, for Adam, as I was poking around Twitter, I found a couple images. So I'm excuse me, I am doxing Kayla's Facebook page. So this is her Facebook profile. Going through divorce. Going through divorce. She really wanted to put out there that she is getting a divorce. She is divorcing. I wonder if she knows that this is out there, and it looks to be real. I think that was probably been sitting there for a while, because she certainly doesn't look like her Facebook profile anymore. I think that's been sitting there for quite some time. Yeah. Tell me you don't have any friends without telling me you don't have any friends. Exactly, with that witness list. Now, I also came across this, and I'm not exactly sure what to make of it. Are they trying to say that Kayla looks like Dave? Is that Dave Grohl? Or who is that? I know that I'm supposed to know who that is that they made her into, but I don't know. Somebody did that on Twitter. I don't know who. I don't know. It looks. I don't know. Anyway, so it seems to me like they might be she is handsome, right? Yeah, I think it is Dave Grohl. I just wouldn't have thought that. I wouldn't have come up with that. I wouldn't have, I was just telling I was just responding actually back to Johnny's email that I so rudely didn't respond to yet with her drawings, and saying I am jealous of anybody who could, even who thinks of this. I just visual art is just not my strong suit. So what I'm picking up from this witness is that he's a forensic interviewer, like, a forensic analyst. He's not a detective anymore. He's either retired detective or just off the force. She actually does. I think you're right, Stephanie. Yeah. So, and they're probably beefing over there on sidebar about what exhibits to use, or whether to use the exhibits, whether they're admissible or whatever. But at least in this case, a sidebar can be called, because there actually is a jury, unlike other cases.
Your Honor, I would like to sidebar here. Is this, Your Honor, sidebar?
There's no jury here.
Okay, well, that's
so
me.
You do a sidebar to keep a jury from hearing things, but there's no jury here. So
okay, then
if you have an objection, make an objection.
That's what happens when you think you're an amazing pro se representative of yourself. And you're just not. But, I think we could also use maybe a little bit of Johnny.
That's hearsay, I guess.
Did I read that right?
You did.
Did I read that right?
You did, sir.
Did I read that right?
You continue to read them right, yes.
And
Man, he was really funny on the stand, man. And this poor guy's like, this is awkward. I know that I'm sitting here on the camera. What do I do? I guess I'll just literally twiddle my thumbs. Oh, gosh.
poured yourself a mega pint of red wine, correct?
A mega pint.
Yeah.
A megapint. What do I have in my coffee? Nothing. That's just plain old caffeine. That's it. Let me it won't get old. I really like that you continue to read that right. Did I read that right? Did I read that right? Well, and then there's the classic movie scenes, right?
Something really wrong is going on. Mr. Kirkland, you are out of order. You're out of order. You're jail is out of order. They're out of order. That man.
Oh, Al Pacino. What was it he said about the powder? Are you talking about Johnny, or are you talking about this trial? I don't remember anything about the powder. You'll have to. Will you please? Your chat is all highlighted when you write Johnny. That's weird. Yeah, chat seems to be glitching. Oh, because we're right. Got it. I'm sorry. That's a because you're Johnny and we're talking about Johnny Depp. You're not supposed to get highlighted until you get at signed, though. That's weird. The powder in the box. I'll have to look that up because I don't specifically remember that one. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about chat glitching lately on YouTube. There's always something with
And
YouTube.
overruled in part.
Oh, okay. The objection is overruled. That was a long sidebar for an objection, but it was finally overruled, and the state wins. State wins that round. So now Mr. Tall Guy, Mr. Tall Prosecutor has to do his stuff up. Oh, is that what he says? Jar of cocaine. Oh, goodness.
No objection.
It's interesting. That was one of the longer sidebars.
I'd
So
just like to walk through what
this
those
must be
documents are
contested
for the
evidence.
jury. If you could start with the first page, the room information. Feel free to use the screen behind you. Do you see the individual's name in the top left?
Yes.
Can you read that for the jurors?
Adam Montgomery.
Step to the mic, counsel.
Does it say Adam Montgomery was saying,
Room 1,
what were the dates associated with this stay?
December 30th of 2019 through February 20th of 2020.
Let's go to the next document. This is work order number A11010. What is the start date of that document?
2/5 of 2020.
What's your understanding of what this document is?
It's a work order for the fit.
And can you read the description on that work order?
It says general other, really cold in units 2 and 5. Come check the thermostat, slight odor when the heat is on. Done on 2/5 of 20.
And what was the unit number associated with that?
Unit 2.
And we'll talk about this later, but are you familiar with the general layout of the rooms in the fit shelter?
Yes.
And let's move to work order number A11079. Which unit number is associated with that work order?
Unit 1.
And that's your understanding of where the defendant was staying.
Correct.
And can you read the general description?
General other, weird smell coming from vents in the unit. Come check it out.
What was the date associated with?
February 21st of 2020.
And you mentioned earlier that the defendant left that room on February 20th.
Correct.
So this is the day after he left.
Correct.
Let me approach your
I know. It's so irritating when the lawyers don't stand by the mic. They need to have more. And this is where they're going to be talking about the forensic evidence from the fit shelter where they put poor little Harmony.
Detective Riley, I'm handing you what's been marked and previously published as States Exhibits 31 through 34, and what's been marked for identification as States Exhibits 35 through 39 for identification. Can you take a look at each of those in turn? I'm going to take these record stacks from you. Can you take a look at each of those in turn and describe what's depicted on those images?
This is the. Are you gonna put them on the screen too? You want me to?
I'm going to put them on the screen, but if you can just talk to me about.
Okay.
Not show the judge.
Okay, so the first picture is a picture of the front of the families in transition, which I'm going to call fit or ease. It's the front door. It's really just the front of the building. And the second is second picture is
Hold on. Attorney Knowles, him saying second picture, I need him to identify what he's looking at by the exhibit number, please.
Just review the number that's depicted at the bottom.
Isn't this number right here?
Yep.
Okay, so number 30 is the front of the building. Number 31 is inside the building, looking at doors, apartments 1 and 2. Number 32 is looking inside unit 1. It's a picture inside the room. Number 33 is another picture inside the room, specifically of the ceiling. Number 34 is a picture of the vent, our area of interest, one of them. Number 35 is a picture above the ceiling, looking at the an area of interest that I'm sure we're going to talk about shortly. Number 36 is I had placed a measuring tape to kind of show the size of the area of our interest up there. And then number 37 is a picture of the ceiling was cut. It was on the floor before they wrapped it.
How about 30, 39, 38. 39, and 39.
So 38 is another picture of the ceiling when it was on the floor. It was placed on butcher paper.
39A.
39A is a picture after I cut the ceiling, just the hole and picture of the room. And then 39B is another picture of the ceiling where I cut out the ceiling.
And do you recognize the items?
I do.
Are they accurate representations of what you saw that day?
They are.
At this point, Your Honor, I move to strike the ID from States Exhibits 35 through 39B.
Not 30 through 34, just 35 through 39B.
30 through 34 have been previously published.
I see, okay. Any objection? All right, the ID is stricken, they're entered as full exhibits.
I
Detective Riley, when you arrived at Families in Transition Shelter, were you accompanied by anyone that day?
Many people, yes.
And you mentioned remembering going there. The image that I've just depicted behind you, identified as States Exhibit 30. Do you recognize that location?
That's the front of the fit, yes.
And the individuals that accompanied you that day, do you remember their names?
some of them.
Okay.
Detective Stewart Coswick, Ray Hill, Deputy Duffs, William Duffs is his name. Tufts, I'm sorry, Tufts. Detective Dunleavy. There was a couple supervisors there, I think.
So the
Captain Layton
individuals
was
that you
there.
just mentioned, the majority of them work for the Manchester Police Department.
Yes, all but one. Yes,
Are you aware of where Deputy Tufts that you mentioned?
U.S. Marshals.
Mr. Riley, what did you do when you arrived at the Families in Transition Shelter, FIT shelter? You mentioned that you did some cutting as you were reviewing those images. Can you tell the jurors what you actually did?
So, you want me to start from my first observation when I walked in the room, or just the actual cutting?
Let's talk about walking into the room first. If you'll look at the image that's on the screen behind you, states Exhibit 31. What are we looking at there?
Unit 1 and 2. The
So,
doors.
Unit 1. I don't know that that's much better, but
This is 01.
can you, so Unit 1 is on the left, and where's Unit 2?
Right here on the right.
So they're adjoining rooms.
Yes. They're polar opposites from each other. I'm pretty sure they're exactly opposite, like this. The walls separated the two.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Oh, yeah. Sir, you just need to speak into the microphone
sorry.
when you're speaking
Yep,
so that everyone can hear you. I know it's hard, but
Yep.
Tell the lawyer too,
And
Judge.
did you make any impressions when you, well, did you enter the room when you arrived?
I did.
And the image that's behind you, you said you recognized.
That's Unit 1.
And was that the layout that day?
It was.
Are you aware of whether or not they're allowed to move furniture at the Families in Transition?
I have no idea.
Tenants?
Not aware.
But that's what you saw when you arrived.
Yes.
And again, can you remind us why you were going there that day?
There was information developed in the investigation that there's a potential that the missing child was placed above the ceiling in this unit.
And was there an access point to that ceiling?
There was.
And do you see it in the image there?
I do. It's the vent at the top.
That vent?
That's correct.
There's a number next to that vent. Can you read that to the jurors?
Number 1.
When you arrived in that room, when you actually walked in, did you make any impression? Did you have any impressions?
I did.
Can you tell the jurors what those impressions were?
There was an odor. I could smell something. I didn't know what it was when I first entered the room, but I could tell there was an odor in the room.
Okay. Any other impressions, Detective?
I mean, it looked lived in. Kind of a normal residence, I guess.
Did you do anything with that vent while you were there?
I did.
What did you do with it?
I removed the vent. I pushed it up into the ceiling and moved it to the side.
Was there anything securing that vent when you moved it?
I don't believe there's anything securing the vent to the outside frame. The vent kind of just sits into the outside frame, but the vent was connected to some tubing up top by a zip tie.
Did you remove that zip tie at some point?
Yes, I did after.
What did you observe did you look into the opening that
I
you
did.
created?
I did.
You observed when you,
As soon as I removed the cover, I knew I could smell what I know is decomposition. I knew I could smell a dead body, what I believed to be a dead body at the time, or it smelled like decomposition is the best way to describe it.
what is decomposition?
When a person dies, their body starts to degrade, I guess is the best word. It's a smell that you just won't forget.
And can you just tell the jurors what your experience is with that smell?
I mean, I've been to many, many death scenes, many autopsies. I've smelt it many times.
Did you make any other observations when you looked into that vent?
I did.
And what were those?
I could see at first that there was, it looked like a stain right close to the edge of the vent. That correct? And I also noted that you can see the sheetrock dust. And I'm sorry if you can't hear me. It's hard to crank my neck around to see this. The sheetrock dust you could tell had been altered. Like you can see in the back, it's all fresh sheetrock dust, probably from when the place was constructed. And this over here appeared to have been something had been in that area.
Mr. Riley, if you don't mind just standing up and actually pointing to that area of dusting that you're discussing.
Right here. You can see here, this is different. The composition is very different between the two. It was clear that something was here and not placed over in this area.
And the staining that you mentioned, where is that? If you could point it out on the screen.
I'm sorry, say that again?
You mentioned seeing staining.
Yes.
Where is that? At some point, did you attempt to measure what you were observing in that picture?
To the best, yes, I did.
And is that it?
It is.
About 16 inches across?
Approximately. It varied in size.
Let's talk about what you did next after you observed this area of interest. What did you do?
We, as a team, we obviously decided that we needed to take this, so we cut it. We used just an old school sheetrock serrated knife, and I cut the sheetrock until I got to the metal studs, and then we had to use a reciprocating saw to cut the metal studs you can see in the picture.
Did you take any precautions while you were working on the ceiling?
When I was up in there, I had gloves on, but I didn't go up into the ceiling. You couldn't because it would collapse. So I didn't really have, other than putting the measuring there, I didn't really have any direct involvement with like the stain. When I started cutting, we changed gloves every time we changed, like when we took the vent down, we changed gloves. When we started cutting, I changed gloves. But I was below the ceiling at this point. I was cutting from below. I wasn't up in the ceiling with it.
Were you wearing a hazmat suit that day, or
I was not.
How about a mask?
I was not.
What were your working conditions like while you were doing this?
It was hot.
It was hot.
It was hot. Yeah, it was very hot.
Sweating?
I was.
How long did it take? You said you removed a portion of the ceiling. How long did that take?
I would say the actual cutting was probably maybe an hour. The whole time we were up there was or dealing with that, maybe 3 hours. I don't recall the exact times, but it was within a couple hours, I think, probably from the time we removed the vent till the time we actually took the ceiling down.
And so you mentioned actually taking the ceiling down. Is that what it looked like?
It is.
And again, that staining, did it become more apparent once you removed it from the dark area it was in?
It did, because of the lighting. It was.
Oh God, that is so
Do you recall whether that item was given an evidence
grotesque.
number?
I know it was. It wasn't tagged by me. My primary focus was just getting it down, and then it was handed off to the team that packaged it and tagged it. I am helping assisting packaging later, but initially they put it and covered it in butcher paper.
Do you recall having it labeled MER 3D?
It sounds right. Yes.
MER, those are initials this jury heard. Do you know whose initials those are?
Yeah, Detective Rayhill.
That's Max Rayhill.
Correct.
You mentioned butcher paper.
Yes.
Do you see that in this image?
Yes, you can see it through the hole. It's sitting on top of butcher paper.
At what point during your processing did you actually place that butcher paper down?
I didn't place it down. The team that was there did. I was standing on. I had the ceiling. I'm not very tall, so I had to stand on a platform to get to cut. So once we got to the point that I could cut the last metal, we had to have other team members hold it, and then once it was detached from the ceiling, I got out of the way and it was put down on a piece of paper.
Do you know what the purpose was of putting it on paper?
Preserve any evidence that's on it or in it.
Would that be including the items that fell during the cutting?
Correct.
Are you aware of how this portion of the ceiling was handled once it was removed, once you removed it?
I know it was placed in the crime scene van, and then I believe I helped carry it up into the evidence room. And then I didn't have anything to do with it for a period of time after that.
Were you aware of low points in the ceiling while you were processing it?
I don't know what do you mean by low points?
Was it completely level, or do you know?
On the outside, looking up, it was flat. Inside, there was a bunch of different channels because of the metal framing.
I want to talk about how large the ceiling was relative to the overall room size. You documented it, is that right?
I did.
And is that accurate in comparison?
It is.
How did you actually get up there to cut this out?
We used that bed frame.
No ladder?
No, well, we had a ladder there as well because we had to have multiple people, but I stood on that bed frame, and if I recall, I may have stepped off to the ladder. And I know there was some talk about having other people jump in because it was hot that day and it was a lot of manual cutting, but I continued, and just because I was already covered in sheetrock dust, there was no sense getting anybody else.
Mr. Raleigh, I want to switch gears. At some point, in your official capacity as an officer with the Manchester Police Department, did you travel to Florida?
I did.
Can you explain that to the jurors, why you did that?
They're trying to figure out how to get this to a lab to test it for DNA or try to figure out what was on this staining. And I know that I didn't myself, but another detective had done some work on this prior to me getting it. I offered to drive it down to Florida because they had it was too big. You couldn't fit it in a plane. It turned into a mess. So I offered to drive it and they said, sure. So I went and rented a car at the airport. And I know that the size, I remember it being 44 inches wide, and we had to find a vehicle that it would fit in. So we rented a car and it fit, and I drove straight to Deerfield Park, Florida. I think it's DNA Labs is the name of the
DNA Labs International?
Yes, correct.
And when you say we drove it, who, if anyone, were you accompanied with?
Detective Bergeron Rosa.
And so you drove it from Manchester to Florida?
We did.
And do you recall the date of that?
I believe that was July 20th of 2022, if I recall correctly.
Did you stay in Florida or did you come back to New Hampshire?
We stayed overnight. We drove straight through. We didn't sleep on the way down. We drove the whole way.
In your career as an officer, have you ever done something like that, such a long trip?
Personally, yes, many times. As a police officer, no.
Did you eventually come back with that item, that portion of the ceiling?
We did.
And when you say we did, was that with Adam Bergeron Rosa or was that another officer?
That was with Detective Heil. Yes. Just a timing thing, so they assigned him to go.
And how did you come back with the item?
We flew down, we rented a car, or it was a Ford Expedition, if I remember correctly, and we came back with that amongst many, many other items. It wasn't just that item, but the vehicle was completely full.
Between the time that you took possession of the portion of the ceiling and the time that you got to the lab in Florida, were you able to maintain and secure possession of that item at all times?
At all times, yes.
And once you obtained it back from the lab in Florida and drove it back to New Hampshire, were you able to contain it, to secure it at all times?
We were.
If I can have just a moment.
Sounds to me like they're actually going to show it here physically in the courtroom. So brace yourselves.
I'll be able to use this now. It was just hard to turn around.
Okay, well, maybe not. But that's what I thought. Maybe they were gearing up for.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Caroline Smith, and I do not have very many questions, but you talked about having many different duties in this case, right?
Correct.
And one of those duties was to talk with Kayla Montgomery.
Yes.
And do you recall when you were speaking with Kayla Montgomery?
I would say either the 30th of December or the I think 12/30 of 2021 is. I may be wrong, but that's kind of in my head.
Okay. Was that at a fit shelter or a recorded interview?
Both. So I talked to her 2 different times, so that may be off by a day. The first time I believe I talked to her. We were at Fit, outside of Fit.
And the second time?
Was at the station.
Okay. And that was a recorded interview?
Correct.
And that was prior to her arrest?
Correct.
Okay. Did you advise her that she could have an attorney?
Yes.
And did you tell her that she didn't have to speak? You wanted to talk to her about missing Harmony?
Yes. I don't know if I did or Detective Dunleavy, but she was advised that it was a voluntary interview. Yes.
Okay. And you talked for a while.
Yeah. Yes, it was. I think it was
And
pretty
then at
lengthy.
some point, I think you all gave her a chance to be alone and write down maybe her thoughts.
Correct.
In case she didn't want to tell you all directly, maybe she wanted to write it down and pull her thoughts together.
That is correct.
Right?
Yes.
And the essence is that and you gave her a fair amount of time, right?
Yes.
And when you came back and looked at the note, it essentially ended the interview.
It did.
Okay. Now, another random duty, I don't mean to call it random. You just
It
were
was.
jumping here, there, and
It
everywhere,
was very
right?
Random.
And
Okay.
one of the things that you did was, sorry, to collect something from the House of Correction that Kayla wrote.
Correct.
Show you what's been marked as Exhibit G. Do you recognize this document?
It's okay to remove it out of here.
Yes. Yeah, you have it.
Okay. I do recognize it.
What is it?
It's a note that she had. That was. I think they were doing a cell search, if I recall correctly, and they found this in her room,
Okay.
in her cell. Sorry.
Okay, and so essentially, the police department, someone discovered that this note had been seized,
Yes.
and you were assigned to go and take the note.
Correct.
And did you talk to the COs and sort of document everything about how that was obtained?
Yes, they had their own report. They provided me with their inside report.
Okay, and do you recall when that was?
I don't. I'd have to see the report. I don't remember the date. I'm guessing early January. I don't recall the date. I have to see it.
If I showed you a copy of her report, would that help refresh
It would.
your
It would.
recollection?
It would. Just too many dates to try to
I know.
wrap my head around them. So it was January 31st of 2022.
Okay, and, excuse me, from the time that you obtained that note, did you put it into evidence and secure it and all that stuff?
I did.
Okay. And just very, very quickly, I want to talk about securing evidence and why you do it, okay?
Yes.
And why you have these initials and all these bags and stuff. You can't do anything about evidence and what happens and who touches it and how it might get transferred and all that stuff until you collect it, right?
Correct.
If you want to preserve something in the exact condition that you want it to be in, you can't affect what happened before, right?
That's correct.
So all you can do is take what you have available, and from that moment, you can preserve it.
Correct.
Any changes an item might have gone through, any transfer of evidence back and forth, you can't affect that.
I cannot.
But from the moment that you collect it, you're gonna make sure that there's virtually no changes in that item, right?
Correct.
And one of the ways that you do it is to collect it and put it in a container.
Correct.
Okay, it might be something like an evidence bag,
Could be.
and it might be something more, it might be an envelope if it's just a document.
Could be.
And in that one, you put it in that clear evidence bag?
I believe this was their evidence bag, but I don't recall if it's ours or theirs. This doesn't look like our bag, but it may have been. We have many different types, so I don't recall if this was mine or theirs.
Okay,
It probably was ours because I believe I took copies of this, so I believe this would be our bag. I may be
Okay.
mistaken.
And that's a plastic bag.
It is.
So you try and collect it and preserve it in the container appropriate for that evidence.
Sure.
For instance, you wouldn't put the tile in plastic because that might cause
Condensation.
condensation and affect the condition of the item within there, right?
Sure.
So
Yes.
you're not so worried about condensation with a piece of paper.
Correct.
Okay. And then when you collect it, the jury has seen items opened and it has red tape. This one is sealed just as a product of the bag it's contained in, right?
Correct.
But other evidence items might have some tape on it.
Sure.
And the reason for the tape is that you are securing the evidence and letting anybody know, once this is taped, that nothing is going to change that item unless we can track it, right?
Sure.
For instance, if evidence has been taped with Manchester Police Department tape, then something might be sent to the lab for checking, right?
Sure.
And the lab would have to open an item to test an item, right?
Correct.
And so when the lab opens whatever packaging that you have retained a piece of evidence in, they actually don't open from the top, right?
I don't do that. I have no idea how they open it.
Sustained.
Okay, so one of the purposes of the different color tapes is to be able to track when an item of evidence has been opened from its packaging.
I use whatever color tape is available. I don't use it for tracking. I use it to seal the item. That's the only reason I do it.
Okay, so if somebody comes along later and opens the item, they have to reseal it to indicate that it's been gone in and then keep the tracking. You don't do that?
Overruled.
I don't reopen evidence. I don't know that I mean, I guess
Okay.
it's possible it could happen, but I wouldn't necessarily use a different color tape if I did.
Okay,
I would cut it in a different area. I would tape it and then initial it after.
okay. So you would cut it in a different area so that somebody knows that it has been opened from the original sealing.
Sure.
And then you would tape it in that second area, right?
Sure.
And you would do a report that documented the fact that for whatever reason you had to go into the bag that contained the item of evidence.
Sure.
So that anybody that wants to know, has there been any changes to this item of evidence, we can track anybody who has had access
It's
to it.
reasonable. Yes.
Okay. But there's nothing you can do about anything before you collect an item of evidence.
Correct.
Okay.
Judges jumping in. What's going on?
Thank you, Officer.
Yes, officer.
Officer Riley, you were asked about interviewing Kayla Montgomery, and you mentioned that interview ended.
It did.
Can you tell the jurors why that interview ended?
She said that she didn't want to talk anymore and she wanted to get an attorney.
She asked for a lawyer.
She did.
Note G, Exhibit G, that note that was collected. Are you sure about who collected it, who put it in that plastic bag?
I think I would have, because I believe I took photocopies. I don't recall if I did photocopies or they gave me photocopies. That's why I'm unsure whether I put it in that bag or someone else.
When you say they may have given you photocopies, you also said it may have been their bags. Who is they?
The
They that you're referring
Valley
to.
Street Jail, Hillsborough County House of Corrections.
Note G also talks about her wanting to speak to her attorney, right?
Correct.
You were asked about the handling of evidence, packaging. You were asked about cross-contamination. Do you know what cross-contamination is?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors what cross-contamination is?
Well,
Did you collect tiles from that fit shelter?
Tiles. They were collected, yes.
I'm here. I'm getting it back. I'm sorry, y'all. I had to restart my whole computer. So sorry. I'm here. I'm getting it back. I'm sorry, y'all.
No, that essentially entered the interview included that she wanted a lawyer, right?
Correct.
But it also included that she didn't know anything more. Go talk to Adam. He wouldn't talk to
Yes.
her. Sorry about my misreference to the ceiling tiles.
So it's okay.
And again, that volunteer of the DNA sample is a lot of stuff can affect an item, and you want to make sure if there's an item of evidence that is revealing information that nobody understands, that they can check your DNA, compare and see maybe it's that versus something else.
Correct.
If there's a question about perhaps DNA being found.
Correct.
Okay. And by the way, note G that you collected from the COs. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. That was not the note we're talking about in the interview. That was the note where Kayla had listed her desires in talking to the AGs.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me step down. Yes.
Stupid internet. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Looks like they might be taking their morning break. She always calls a sidebar. They don't just say out loud, okay, let's take a break. She always calls a sidebar. She always says sidebar and let's take a break.
Our mid-morning break. It's about 10:33, so just after quarter of, we'll come back and resume the evidence. Thank you for your attention. All of my instructions apply today as well. So don't talk about the case, please. Thank you. All rise for the jurors, please.
It does seem early for the break. Maybe there's, something else going on that they need to handle. Yeah, it is much more reliable to go by a dog's pooping clock. That is for sure. I'm just listening to see if they say anything interesting that tells us why they're
15
taking.
minutes, so 12 for you all.
All right. So just to recap a little bit, what we've basically seen is the evidence shown of the forensic evidence. Well, first we started out with the DNA expert testifying to the, DNA analysis and basically just backing up and validating that the DNA that she tested from the toothbrush is, very specifically harmonies, like something like 100 trillion, no, not trillion, even more, like many, like it seems impossible that it wouldn't be anybody but harmony, right? It's more likely her than gosh, I forget the number, but it's like a trillion billion, something like that. Then this detective got up, and he's the one who obviously spent a lot of time working on the case in various aspects. One of them was to be the one to physically go to the fit shelter where they stored Harmony's body for a bit of time, and at least long enough for decomposition fluids to start leaking into the ceiling tiles. So they actually cut out that entire section of ceiling tile, and that detective rented a car himself and physically drove it to Florida from New Hampshire for the analysis. And that's dedication, because what they realized is that they couldn't fit it on a plane, in baggage handling or in the carry-on, right? He said it was something like 44 inches. They had to get make sure that they rented a special car for it. And I also noticed that I was poking around on Twitter again, just trying to see Caroline, before I mention that, I want to look it up myself, and I haven't looked it up, and I want to see what it says. It's not that I doubt you. It's just that I don't want to start speaking to something I don't know about. As horrible as that is. So this reporter here in the courtroom says that the jury is paying close attention to the pictures of the ceiling stains where Kayla said Adam hid the body. So the jury seems to be, doing its job, paying attention. That's obviously the least we could hope for. Hopefully there's no fuckery going on. Hopefully no bailiffs are going into the room and saying, watch his body language. like in the Alex Murdaugh trial. I'm going to, there was something else I saw on Twitter that I'm looking for right now. People were asking earlier about the about the witnesses. So we have a pretty long list of witnesses that the state has put forward. And I was showing that yesterday. And I'm going to show it right here again, because just we can kind of go down and maybe see what we, if we can tell with our own brains who has testified and who hasn't. This was filed on February 1st of 2024. So this is what I mean when I say that there's a list of witnesses that, they file, but they don't necessarily update it every day to the public. They update it, I think they have some sort of informal process where they update each other on who's going to be coming per day, but they have this list. And from looking at it, I'm seeing some names stick out that we know for sure have testified. And this list right here that we're looking at, these are the civilians. These are just the civilians, not law enforcement. And even though the defense put 2 witnesses on their list, one is a cell or prison mate, one is the foster mother who also already testified, so they would be recalling her. On this list, I recognize that, obviously Anthony Badero already testified. Let's see, Christina Lubin, it right here. She was yesterday. That is Kayla's mother. So she testified yesterday. Courtney Garcia, I believe, was the ex, like, kind of side boo thing that Adam had in rehab while he was still married. She got up and testified. I believe, yes, Crystal Sorry is her mother, is Harmony's mother. She testified. I don't know who that looks like. It might be a typo. It might be Ed Travers. Maybe it's, I don't know. But Demetrios Saros did testify. I don't know if Dennis Burneth testified yet. And let's keep going. They are picking their way through it. So a few names that stuck out before also that, are these Montgomerys, Aaron Montgomery, Helen Montgomery. And I guess people were looking up and finding that Helen Montgomery is his mother or grandmother. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. They haven't shown much of the gallery today, but I believe, Oh, Courtney Garcia worked with Adam. She was the blonde before Kim Frayne. Okay, gotcha. And I haven't caught all the names as they've come up because sometimes it's hard to hear. Sometimes I'm distracted with doing something else in the chat or something. But so there may be some of these witnesses that did come up and I just didn't catch their name. But there's Helen Montgomery and Aaron Montgomery. And I know later on the list, there's a Michael Montgomery. And continuing on, I think Richard Lewis may have testified. Kayla has testified. Kevin has testified. I think maybe Michael Doby testified. So it'll be interesting to see which ones come in today. Yesterday they interspersed like the technical and, the sort of drier version of the, witnesses, like these detectives and things. They intersperse those people with family members, where it was a little more, I hate using the word interesting, engaging. It feels so wrong to say the word interesting in the middle of a trial like this. It's just more engaging, more, seem and impactful. Let's see. Just make sure we're not missing people on this list here. I think maybe Nicholas Ahern may have testified. I forget the name. There was the Dunkin' Donuts manager or coworker. There's probably going to be coworkers from Adam. I thought people have been calling the Dunkin' Donuts guy Adam's coworker, but I think that was actually Kayla's coworker. Because I thought it was Kayla who was working at Dunkin' Donuts, and then she got fired because she was caught stealing from the till. Right. And let's see. Sandra Ramirez, Scott Hubble, Shirley Oakes, Tabitha Scott, Tara Hosington, Tara Hilbert. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these people, I just have not seen them coming in necessarily. There's just a lot of people on the list. A lot of people. This is where I did get, oh, look at this. Well, isn't that a peach? This looks like, oh, Adam also worked at Dunkin' Donuts at some point. I did not know that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Kathy and Queen, Bella. Scout. I just want to know, where was the grannies, aunties, family members? I know. It just boggles the mind, Scout. I know every time we hear Dunkin' Donuts, everybody's like, oh my God, I want a donut. So this picture looks like they could have really started to be, go into their addiction, right? I mean, so you compare this picture to, say, this picture. Could be around the same time frame. I want to see if there's a caption on this picture. It looks like they're at someone's workplace, like that could be Dunkin' Donuts, or maybe it's where he was working. The other, the other place he was working at, the pie place, or is that the shelter? Maybe it is the shelter. Well, it's just that, but also I agree with that, Johnny, what you're saying. You don't necessarily want to stick the children with the same people that brought up the people who are willing to do this, but sometimes people get older and they changed and they realize that they made mistakes, and they have the ability to adjust how they raise a child. Okay, they're back. They are back.
Just one brief housekeeping matter
Okay.
for this particular witness. With regards to the next witness, the state's going to intend to call Detective Raymond Lammy from the Manchester Police Department. This will involve some handling of the pieces of evidence, especially some of the larger pieces of evidence. One of the evidence technicians that happens to work in the Manchester Police Department, David Dido, is present in the courthouse today. We would ask if you would be able to just simply glove up and be able to help handle some of those materials for Detective Lammy, rather than having Detective Lammy do all of the work himself, because we will be talking about some of the largest items that we have.
Any objection to that?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, and can he stay during cross and
Absolutely.
Do
I
this-
think that's
do the
way
same
to
thing?
do it, is to be impartial in terms of his ability to assist the jury in understanding.
so if you want him, if you don't, I'll leave that to you, Attorney Smith, but he'll be available to help manage the larger pieces of evidence if you want that, okay? All right, that's fine. Maybe just introduce him. He's not testifying, but I think it might be useful for them to know who he is. Okay, very good. All right, ready to bring in the jurors? Everybody ready? Yes?
Yes, Your Honor, sorry.
Now we've got sound issues from the court. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but the state was asking if it's okay to bring someone else to help with the handling of some of the evidence. And
I guess maybe they'll take it out of there.
and
The
when
cart, yeah. The cart will fit? Yeah. Okay.
and when the judge asked Sally Jesse, Oriani, Raphael, Barbara, if she had any objections, she said, I guess not, or not for now. So it's either a yes or no. You object or you don't object. You can't hold on to your objection and be like, oh, I object now. I didn't object before, but I object now. It's very Elaine Oriani
Maybe
kind of
seated.
move.
State may call its next witness.
Yes, sir. The state calls Raymond Lammy.
In addition, we'd like to call evidence technician David Dido, simply be able to assist with the handling of physical evidence, not to testify.
The objection?
Not objection.
So Raymond Lammy, detective. If I get time tonight, what I'll try to do is go through all the witnesses that we know have testified and check them off that list, and so we have a better idea.
You swear that the testimony that you're about to provide this jury will be the truth and the whole truth under the pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
You can have a seat, make yourself comfortable. There's some water there. And Detective Lammy, if you can get started by just stating and spelling your full name for the record.
Ray Lammy, Lamy.
And Detective Lammy, how are you presently employed?
I'm currently employed as a detective with the Manchester Police Department.
How long have you worked as a detective?
I've been a detective a little over 5.5 years.
And what's your current assignment?
My primary function is fraud investigation, and I also am a lead in crime scene processing.
What are your current duties and responsibilities, Detective Lammy?
General investigations of any financial crime from start to finish. When it comes to any major crimes in the city, violent crimes, then we all lend a hand and process those and work on those together.
Have you ever had any other roles at the Manchester Police Department?
I was a patrol officer for just about 5 years.
And prior to that, any law enforcement experience?
2 years in Litchfield as a police officer.
Did you graduate from the New Hampshire Police Academy?
I did class 163, approximately February, March of 2014.
Detective Lammy, do you participate in regular training as a function of your role with the Manchester Police Department?
I do.
What types of training have you completed?
Notwithstanding a litany of financial crime investigations, I've done forensic identification of skeletal remains, blood stain pattern analysis, crime scene processing, death investigations, FARO certified, and crime scene photography.
You mentioned the FARO just now. Can you tell the jurors just generally what that is?
A FARO is a 3D device that can map out an area, which is useful for documenting measurements and recreating a scene for the jury, such as yourself.
I want to switch gears, Detective Lammy. Were you working in your official capacity as a detective, rather? Were you assigned to a particular case involving a missing child, Harmony Montgomery?
Yes.
And can you just generally describe your role and participation in that case?
Majority of my role was helping coordinate evidence processing, liaison between the state lab and private labs, processing of several vehicles for evidence, and also some other various items that were processed.
Did you coordinate with a lab in Florida during your participation?
I did.
And when did your involvement begin in this matter?
The beginning of January, we had some initial tips that were phoned in that we went and investigated in Haverhill, Mass. And then a vehicle was processed middle to the end of January.
You mentioned the beginning of January. Do you remember what year that was?
2022.
You mentioned tips, and I want to discuss that. Are you aware of a tip line related to the disappearance of Harmony Montgomery?
Yes, I am.
Had you worked in your career as a law enforcement officer, as a detective, had you worked on a case involving a tip line before?
I've had tips come in for some of my own cases and financial crimes.
I guess I'm referring to a specified tip line associated with this case.
I did not field the tips or the calls. I was just asked to follow up on them.
You were directed to follow up on them?
Correct.
And you said one of those was in, did you say Haverhill, Mass?
Yes.
You mentioned processing vehicles during your participation in this case. Was one of those vehicles a blue Audi AS4 bearing New Hampshire registration number 4569334?
I can tell you that it was an Audi AS4 blue. I can't tell you the exact plate without referencing my notes.
Your Honor, if I may, if I may approach.
Yes.
Detective Lemmy, I'm handing you what's been previously published as State's Exhibit 22 for identification. Or for
Yeah. I do recognize that vehicle. It's the one that I processed here at Manchester Police Department, New Hampshire plate 4569334.
And that's a Audi that you processed.
Yes.
Were you working with other officers or detectives during the processing of that vehicle, Detective Lemmy?
I was.
And how many days roughly did it take for you to process that vehicle?
The physical processing of the vehicle took about 3 days, and then there were additional days after that processing the evidence that we took out of it.
Was it consistent? Excuse me. Was it consistent with individuals that were assisting you during your processing of that vehicle, or did the numbers change?
The members changed a little bit.
Do you know a Detective Heil?
Yes.
How about a Detective Pittman?
Yep. The two of them and I were responsible the first day of basically inventorying the vehicle, identifying the majority of the evidence items that we pulled out.
And this jury has already heard about the initial processing as you take in evidence. But Detective Pittman, do you know what his initials were?
JP.
And the items that you collected from that vehicle, were they processed under a specific set of initials?
Yes, JP.
About how many pieces of evidence, potential evidence, were labeled with initials during your time working in that Audi?
Under the, I would say it's approximately 271.
Separate from that, did you use any testing during your processing of that Audi?
Yeah. After the first round of testing, or the first round of processing the vehicle, a few items were tested with a method known as a hemistick. And a hemistick basically is a reagent on a strip that, when comes in contact with hemoglobin, will turn a dark green.
Did you test all 271 items using a hemistick?
No, we did not.
Why not?
We essentially looked at the items on what appeared to have potential for yielding some type of blood or DNA.
Are you aware of false positives occurring with the use of a hemistick?
Yes, I am.
And can you explain that to the jury, please?
The reagent on the hemistick can get false positives, which will trigger it to appear to react as if it came in contact with hemoglobin, which is found in blood. And some of the items that can do that are potato, tomato, iron. They can give you what you would think to be a positive, but it ends up being a false positive.
Because of
That's
false
interesting.
positives, Detective Lemmy, when you see something that's presumptively positive, what do you do with it?
Well, presumptive positive is just an indicator that it could have hemoglobin. So we treat everything as if it has the chance to have that. In this particular case, the items that tested positive were sent up to the New Hampshire State Lab for processing.
And I guess let me ask this, do you take additional swabs to send up to the New Hampshire State Lab?
Depending on the item, I believe in this case, the items were small enough that we were able to send the whole item up to the lab.
On this particular vehicle, where did you use the hemosticks?
In the back seat, there was a car part just randomly sitting on the seat, and it was plastic with car insulation, like sound and deadening insulation on it. And there were a couple of spots on that looked suspicious that I tested.
How would you describe, excuse me, how would you describe the condition of the vehicle when you examined it?
So the vehicle had what appeared to be, and we didn't test it, but it smelled like it, appeared to have a thick layer of mold all throughout the inside of the passenger compartment.
And you previously mentioned working on that vehicle for several days. Did you take any precautions because of that?
We wore Tyvek suits, and also not wanting to breathe in mold, we wore face masks.
Of the items that were pulled from that vehicle, did you send any off to the state laboratory?
I did.
And do you remember which items you submitted?
The first three items that we did initially were, I believe, JP 55, which was the car part, JP 120, and JP 122, which were carpeted floor mats.
Do you recall submitting item JP 119, 153, 195, 224, 251, 216, 225 to the lab as well?
So those were sent several days or a week later when we processed outside of the vehicle area. And I actually used a different testing method for that one.
What was that testing method?
So I transitioned from the hemistick to Kastle-Meyer, which is a similar type of test. It's processing using reagents to also identify hemoglobin. But the Kastle-Meyer historically has been known to provide less false positives. So I transitioned to that and processed approximately 37 items that had come out of the car. And out of that, I believe 6 gave me a presumptive positive and 1 was a false positive.
When you say that 1 was a false positive, how did you determine that?
So, and not to get too technical, but the way the test works is you drop 3 drops on a swab. So the swab is used to collect the evidence off of the item. Sometimes it's a dry swab, sometimes it's a drop that's been dipped in sterile water. You rub it on the evidence item, then you drop a couple of drops of what's called phenolphthalein onto the swab. If the swab immediately reacts with just those initial drops, that's considered a false positive, because until you add a couple of drops of hydrogen peroxide, 3%, onto the item, it shouldn't react at all. In one of the cases, it reacted as soon as I dropped the first couple of phenolphthalein drops onto it.
Excuse me. You mentioned this green color when you're using hemisticks.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a color associated with the Kastle-Meyer test?
Yes, Kastle-Meyer will turn a bright pink.
And is there a different level of pink that you're looking for, or is it something else?
It's not so much the level with the Kastle-Meyer test as it is the time frame of how long it takes to react. So if it reacts immediately, it's a stronger indicator that it's a true positive.
Can you still have false positives with, well,
You can.
I think you mentioned that you did in this case.
Yeah, you can still have false positives with the Kastle-Meyer. So it's just a presumptive test that gives you an indication. Let's look further at this.
So, Detective, I want to switch gears. I want to discuss processing of a portion of a ceiling. Are you familiar with what I'm referring to?
I am.
And can you just generally tell the jurors what your involvement was with that?
Certainly. So I was aware in my conversations with the team that a large section of ceiling had been gathered. I was also aware that that piece of evidence had been sent up to the state lab for processing. They processed it for different items and did not come back with enough evidence to support there being DNA on the item. I was told by members of the team that they sent a couple of these pieces of the ceiling down to the private lab we mentioned earlier, DNA labs in Florida, to have tested, and they came back as testing positive for blood.
And
Sustained.
I'll redirect, Judge. So I don't want you to get into the specific testing of any of the items, but just what you did. You've explained that.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may approach.
Yes.
I'm showing the defense what's been marked by identification. States Exhibit 40 through 51. Detective, I'm handing you what's been marked for identification. Identification as States Exhibit 40, Exhibits 40 through 51. And I'm just going to ask that you review each in turn and then look up when you're ready.
Okay.
And Detective, you looked up. So are you familiar with those images as well as what's depicted therein?
I am.
And how are you familiar with them?
I took the photos.
Okay. Are they fair and accurate?
They are.
And again, you took these photos?
Yes.
Are they consistent with what you saw the day you took them?
Yes, they are.
All right, at this point, I move to strike what's been marked for identification as States Exhibit 40 through 51.
Without objection. Without.
Without objection, the ID is stricken. They're entered as full exhibits. They may be published to the jury.
I'm going to take them back. I'm going to put some up on the screen. We'll go through them. So you mentioned being tasked with processing this item. Are you familiar with the item number associated with it?
MER 3D,
And when did your processing occur?
July 15th, 2022.
Specifically, what was the item that you were tasked with processing?
The MER 3D was a large section of ceiling tile, which was sheetrock with some metal strips on the top of it.
And so those images that I asked you to look at, I've put one up on the screen behind you. Can you explain to the jurors what they're looking at?
Yeah, this is the whole piece of evidence as I examined it that day. And you're essentially looking at a center opening that I believe is where a vent was, but I wasn't present when they removed this item. And the metal pieces you see are the strips on the top part of the ceiling. You wouldn't see this from underneath it, but that's what the sheetrock would have been mounted up to.
And when you say you weren't present for the removal, is that from the location that it was taken from?
Correct.
The shelter, the fit shelter?
Correct.
And so what does this image depict?
This image is evidence. I requested that the item be, that I examine the item because we didn't, well, I won't speak to the lab results, but I requested that I review the item to see if I could find any potential traces of evidence that we should be looking for. So the evidence technicians brought this out for a viewing. I viewed the item. I noticed things on the item that made me suspicious that there were additional areas that we should be testing.
Detective Lemmy, let me ask you this. When you received the item from the laboratory, was it packaged up?
Yes, so it was, this is how I found it at evidence. The evidence technicians brought it out, they opened it, and this is how I found it.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
So Caroline, this is the Anthony Badero that I see. He doesn't look anything like the Anthony Badero from the stand. And this guy's from Sacramento. And that's in California. And the one on the stand yesterday was from New Hampshire. Now, he said he lived in New Hampshire for 14 years, or sorry, at least Manchester for 14 years. But he had a very solid, Eastern accent. So I don't think it's the same guy.
So, Detective Lenny, I'm showing you it's been marked for identification as States Exhibit 108. Are you familiar with this item?
I am.
And what is it?
It's a hand sketch that I made of the ceiling.
And when we discussed your processing of that portion of the ceiling, how did you process it?
So the entire physical piece, as you see it here, was brought into our training room at the police station. It was placed on 2 work tables with that side face up. It was removed from the evidence bag that it was in and placed on butcher block paper on the tables. Then we went through the process of basically dismantling the metal pieces from the sheetrock.
And let me stop you there.
Mhm.
Going through that process of dismantling the metal framing from the sheetrock, was it important to keep track of what was coming from where on this object as a whole?
Yes. So because the whole piece was entered into evidence as one evidence number, once I was going to start dismantling it, I attached my own initials and numbers to each piece that was then separated.
So when you attached your own initials, did you still preserve the earlier initials? So MER 3D and then your initials following that?
Correct.
And so this item that I've just shown you, why did you create this?
Well, other than having photos of it, this helps to show where the positioning of each of the items was. It's not to scale, but it shows where the items were so that we could have a better understanding.
Did you create this as a demonstrative to show where each piece came from?
Yes.
Each of the pieces, I think you mentioned this, but you gave a specific evidence number of its own with your own initials attached.
Correct.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of the sketch that you created?
Yes.
And at this point, I'm going to strike the ID of States Exhibit 108. Mark is full and published to the jury.
No objection.
The ID is stricken. It's entered as a full exhibit. It may be published.
That exhibit does look like it's quite large to be transporting.
And so I've added the image to the screen behind you. That States Exhibit 108. And I want to discuss the items that you packaged or that you removed. You mentioned the railing. Did you remove any other items?
We separated several of the pieces of the sheetrock from the main unit. There was one large piece that I ended up keeping intact, but then we separated off parts that didn't appear to be important as far as any potential evidence items on it.
And you mentioned taking the photos. Did you give those photos specific evidence numbers?
Yes.
Did you provide a description along with each of those evidence numbers?
I did.
And so can you explain to the jury what they're looking at here?
So and I'll point up here if you can't see, let me know, but I just put a tape measure on it just to see what the distance was between the metal grids. On here, there's also a couple of handwritten letters written right onto the sheetrock. That was not done by me. I presume that was done by the state lab. And there's what appears to be a dark stain in the center of this piece of sheetrock.
And so the letters that you're referring to, if you can just read them for the jurors.
Far left is the letter A next to that cutout. B cutout. C and D are in the stain area.
And when you received this item back from the state crime lab or the state forensic laboratory rather, that had already been done. That's not something that you did during your processing.
That's correct.
So this item is MER 3D RL4. Can you describe what the jurors are seeing in this picture?
RL4 is the metal grid that runs across here. It was sitting on top of that dark stain, and it's lifted up on edge, so flipped up on its side. And there's also dark staining on the metal itself.
And when you say that dark staining, did that become an area of potential evidentiary value during your processing?
Yes, it did.
And I just want to show the jurors where that item, MER 3D RL4, came from. Do you see it depicted on the sketch you drew?
So RL4 is this section that runs completely across the larger piece. And in this smaller box, it's right here.
And what's depicted in this image?
This is still part of MER 3D RL4. It's the other end of the piece, and it's also showing dark staining running underneath that grid.
I want to move on to RL14. What's depicted in this image?
RL14 ended up being a piece of the sheetrock that we separated from the main piece. It's separated approximately at where this line is. And this is the dark stain on the sheetrock itself that had been under RL4.
And I want to look at where that came from in relation to the portion of the ceiling that you processed. Can you just point that out on your sketch?
Yeah. So RL14 is this section right about to here, over to about this line that extends from here.
And what does this image depict?
RL16, so this line right here would have been where RL4, that long strip that runs across, and then RL16 is another section of sheetrock that we separated from the main piece of interest, and approximately at where that thin line is going across, that's where we separated that piece from.
During your processing of MER 3D, did you become aware of low points or warps essentially in the drywall and framing area?
I can't tell by looking at it the way it's laying on our workstations if the item would have been angled when it was sitting on the ceiling itself. But what I can tell from looking at this, where there was a dark stain in that center, and then you see a much darker stain running along that railing, it would appear that the fluid that would have made that stain would have run along that, which is not uncommon for fluid to track an object that's attached to it.
Did the fluid, the staining, appear to be absorbed into the drywall?
It appeared to be absorbed into the drywall more in that center area where it was a lighter color. And then it didn't, it was much heavier consistency along where the rail had been.
And what is depicted in this item, this image?
So this is still part of where RL4 was, sitting on top of it. And this is just a shot from the side of the piece to show that there's depth to the staining itself.
At the time of your processing, Detective Lemmy, were you aware of other testing that had been conducted on this item at the lab?
I was.
Laboratory. And can you tell the jurors what that is?
So those two square cutouts that you saw on the sheetrock itself where the paper was missing, those two had been cut out and sent down to the lab as part of the state's processing of the item. And the results came back.
You're saying?
Sustained.
Not asking you for the results, but you were aware of other testing that had been conducted.
Correct.
Were you aware of fingerprint testing, latent print testing conducted on the item?
I hadn't reviewed results of that, but I was aware that some had been attempted.
What does this image depict?
It's just another more direct on from the side of where RL4 had been sitting, the kind of the thick layer of staining.
And again, this item.
Again, this is RL4 going across, and then this section that goes up, that's where RL3 railing had been.
In this image.
And this just continues on. This is where RL3 was. RL2 was down in this area. That's where the initial stain had been, and then RL1 would have been up in this area.
Are you aware of whether there was a vent involved in the processing of this item?
I was aware just from the team, but I had not viewed it.
Are you aware of where the opening to that vent would have been?
Yes, the opening of the vent would have been in this area. There was metal grids coming out this way in the initial photos.
You mentioned the Castle-Meyer testing. Did you swab? Did you test? Did you use the Castle-Meyer test
I did.
during your processing? And what's depicted in the image?
So again, this is the part of RL4 that we were looking at predominantly. It's showing my sample swab, and it's showing a bright pink result. So essentially, a swab was used, it was dipped in a sterile water, it was rubbed on the staining itself in that area, and then the Castle-Meyer test was applied to it. And once the the couple of drops of the hydrogen peroxide were applied to it, it was an immediate pink.
And can you remind the jurors what that immediate pink, what it told you?
The faster it reacts, the more likelihood it is that it's a positive versus a false positive.
Detective Lemmy, based on your processing of MER 3D overall, the portion of the ceiling that you processed, did you submit any of those items to DNA Labs International?
I did.
And what of those items did you submit?
That whole piece of sheetrock that remained after those other few that we looked at were removed was sent down as one item. The rails that came off, RL1, RL2, RL3, and RL4, those were packaged separately and sent down as well.
And let's talk about those rails, Detective Lemmy. When you removed the rails from the drywall, did you have any observations?
So other than the darker staining like this that was present under a couple of them, once RL4, which was the long piece, and over the part that was more heavily stained, as soon as that piece came up off the sheetrock, there was a noticeable foul smell.
And what was that smell associated with?
I would speculate that it's from that stain itself.
Detective Lemmy, I want to switch gears and I want to talk about the ceiling itself. We have portions of it here, and I'm going to ask that you remove, and you have your evidence custodian with you, technician with you. I'm going to ask that you remove them from their packaging to show to the jury. And so, Your Honor, I would just ask that this witness be permitted to move freely with the evidence technician.
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Okay. Trigger warning, everyone. Everything that he just testified to, we are now going to see physically. If you are feeling terrible,
Specific item would be in relation to the scale.
don't hesitate to remove yourself. Don't hesitate to remove yourself and come back, when you feel more equipped to.
And Detective Lemmy, if you can start with Exhibit
There's that big
74, identified as MER 3D RL13.
Yes, he has admitted to guilt in this, in this particular storage.
Detective Lanning, while he's assisting you, specifically
Discretion
with
of
respect to
court and removal
RL13,
of
is that
corpse.
one of the items that was sent down to DNA Labs International in Florida?
Yes, it was.
Right? What a coward. What a coward. He most likely, well, he definitely caused this, and he's not there to be accountable for it. Agree, Janessa, and I agree. It's infuriating that he won't tell us where she ended
While
up,
they're doing that, could you approach the
even though he admitted it. He admitted to getting rid of her body. He won't admit to where she is. So what does that mean? That they would be able to prove with whatever remains there are that he did something? Yes, while they're doing that, let's just remember why we're here. Remember her like this. She's a person. She was somebody's person. I agree, McNutMac. Yeah, I'm sorry. That just showing that picture of her in the context of what they're doing right now really hit me some kind of way, man. Yeah, I have been thinking about, other trials where I don't think this is a death penalty case. No, I don't believe this is a death penalty case. Because they don't have a body, you know. And Yeah, I've been thinking about other trials. There have been some insanely high profile trials recently that would be dicey to start talking about because they're political, where the main defendant did not show up at all. And so it is their right. And also the judge, we watched you know, the judge talking to Adam on the monitor, or actually telling the jury that he's not going to be there, and she did say that you cannot infer anything negative from him not being there. That's their instruction. So that is his right.
Show it to the jurors if you can watch them.
Can you pick it up? I don't think it needs to be.
And Nick Not Mac, we don't get stripped of our rights until we're actually convicted of the crime. So that definitely is how it feels. I agree with how it feels like it should be that way, but that is just the way. Okay, look at the screen. If you don't want to look at the screen, you don't have to, but they are now showing the ceiling, the physical ceiling.
Your Honor, I would move to mark what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 74 as full, so strike the ID and publish. I missed doing that prior. There's no objection.
No objection.
All right, the ID is stricken. It's entered as a full exhibit.
So, Detective Lamy, if you can just identify where RL13 is in relation to the sketch that you've drawn. Sure.
And I know this may sound gross, but I'm sort of wondering, after they've kept it stored like that and in the
Visitors, if
packaging,
it's difficult to see because it's low to the ground and you want to stand, you should feel free to do that. Okay.
if it still has an odor.
What you saw cut off from here, over this way, down to about this section. And that's what that bottom dark stain was from here over to the edge.
I would just ask if Your Honor would allow, if Detective Lamy can just point that out to the jurors.
He can point it out. Yes.
If he can approach closer to the jurors.
On the board?
With the board.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. Just the condition of that, I didn't think it made sense to get too close.
So what you were seeing down behind the paper was the dark stain emitting this way. RL3 had been here, you saw a small jet out, a dark stain, and the darker is in this section. And RL4 was this piece that ran straight across the
And if we could just move Exhibit 74, I want to move on to Exhibit 75, which is RL15.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to tell. The judge didn't have a particular look on her face, but as soon as that feeling came out of the bag, her hand it was almost like an involuntary muscle memory. Her hand went up to her face. I believe you, bitter pill. That was why I thought of that. I've never been around, a person emitting that smell after death, but I have been around animals like that, and it sears your brain as soon as it hits. Let's watch their faces to see if we can see anything, any grimaces or anything.
If it's the wrong number, that's fine. We can move on. Can we go to
Oh, they unwrapped the wrong
what's been marked for
evidence.
identification as Exhibit 76? That's
Something.
RL 15.
There was an error with the evidence.
So just to be clear, that item was the original package that NBR 3D was in.
So the butcher paper that we saw in the exhibit, that's what it was set on?
Yeah, the first photo that showed it sitting on the table, partially open.
This is going to raise
That paper is what
chain of custody issues.
Was that also submitted to the lab in Florida?
No.
Oh gosh. Something for the defense to jump on.
It is.
I don't know, Johnny.
And Detective
That's
Lemmy, while you're opening up,
above
can you just
my
describe
pay and
what-
knowledge
what
grade.
this item is RL15.
So this one is RL 15. The way I said it to you earlier. RL 4 ran all the way across this way. RL 15 is just take the street line. So cut that out. So this piece was not submitted to anyone.
And if you could just hold it up for the jurors to see. Your Honor, I would move to strike ID and mark as full, State's Exhibit 76.
Without objection.
Right, the ID is stricken. It's entered as a full exhibit.
Detective Lemmy, I'd like to move on to what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 77. That's RL 16.
Johnny, she'll probably raise the question to the detective in cross-examination because he's the one that is testifying to the chain of custody. So it'll probably be addressed in the cross-examination. You could look at their body language. They are so deflated right now. Yep, they were showing the tile,
While they're
Stephanie.
working on that, counsel, do you want to approach?
Yeah, Bitter Pill. I'm not sure she'll be able to do it effectively, but she's going to try. And maybe they're talking about it right now. But did you see how deflated everyone got when, you know, the lawyer had to point out that there was a different number? Or maybe it was the detective first pointed it out. It's a different, that, you know, the lawyer was saying, show this at number exhibit X, and then the detective unveiled it and said, oh, this isn't the same number. And they have to be precisely correct in terms of the chain of custody. So what happened was, as the detectives were unwrapping evidence that was about to be submitted and published, there appeared to have been a mishap in how the evidence was labeled. And it sounds like there might have been some, you know, construction paper that was on the outside that was marked one way, and then on the inside was marked another way. So it sounds like it was human error. Yeah, punch in the gut
And
for sure.
Detective Lemmy, if you can just describe what this item is and where it came from, according to your sketch.
So RL 16, you know, I'll keep it consistent as far as how I was holding it for you. That item is running from here out to the end, approximately down this way over. And RL1 railing had not been touching that particular piece, because RL 16 is this area right here.
And on your sketch, where's the vent area located?
That's down here.
So this would have been a void, essentially.
Yes.
Let's move to the next item. I'd ask that exhibit be marked full, ID stricken, and published to the jury.
The ID is stricken. It's entered as a full exhibit. It can be published to the jury.
Detective Lemmy, I want to move to State's Exhibit 78, what's been identified as RL 11. Your Honor, the same with that item. I'd ask that State's Exhibit, what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 79, that the ID be stricken, it be marked as full and published.
Without objection.
So you said 79.
I'm sorry, 78,
Okay, 78.
RL 11.
The ID is stricken, it's entered as a full exhibit, and it can be published to the jury when it's taken out.
And while that's being opened up, Detective Lemmy, can you just tell the jurors what this item is and where its relative location was on that portion of the ceiling according to your scale?
So in the same place, the patient, opening where the door would have been, RL was.
Was this item submitted to the laboratory?
No, it wasn't.
Thank you, Detective. And if we can move to what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 79, that's MER 3D. State's Exhibit 79.
So the questions about Adam and not saying where she is, it gets a little legally technical in nature, such that I'm not qualified to really describe. But he hasn't pled guilty to those charges. He has just admitted, he's made an admission on those items. So, and that was to allow his defense
And
to
80 is RL 3A.
create their defense. And so it sounds to me like he's only trying to admit to just the things that he
79 remains for identification, is that accurate?
just the things that he did for legal purposes.
75 and 79 remaining for ID, correct?
Correct.
That's your understanding, Attorney Brown?
Judge.
I don't think we know his actual response to them, Janessa.
And while that's being opened, Detective Lemmy, if you can just describe where that item was collected from in relation to the sketch of the portion of that ceiling.
RL 3 is the middle of the road. RL 4.
Again, Your Honor, I move to strike ID, mark as full and publish.
He didn't plead guilty officially. He just
The ID is stricken on Exhibit 80. It's entered as a full exhibit and it can be published to the jury.
and also, that's something he can, crawling into his sick and demented mind, it's something he can hold back and try to use as leverage later for some sort of, oh God, that is just painful in the ears. Hold on. So it's like something he's holding in his back pocket. And also,
This is the metal rail. This is how the orientation would have been, according to that chart. Running down. RL4 was running across this way.
And Detective Lemmy, if you can just show them the underside of that rail.
This is the side closest to RL4 that was running across.
And was this item submitted to the lab in Florida?
Yes, it was.
I agree with that,
Detective
Bitterfield.
Lemmy, when you're ready, I'd like to move on to State's Exhibit 81, what's been marked as State's Exhibit 81 for identification. That's RL3, RL4, RL12.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that he probably doesn't know where Harmony ultimately ended up with the way that he appears to have desecrated her, right? But he can at least say where he disposed, right?
Your Honor, I'm moved to strike ID.
Oh, I'm sure he would recall that even if he was drugged up, Dexter.
No objection.
I don't think
The
that's
idea is
something you
stricken.
forget.
It is entered as a full exhibit. It may be published to the jury once it is open.
Because Kayla said that he was so distraught over it that he tried to unalive himself a couple times after that. So he remembers. He knows if
Detective
what
Lemmy,
she's
while
saying
that's
is
being
true.
opened, can you please describe for the jurors where this piece of evidence came from in relation to that portion of the ceiling using the sketch that you found?
This was actually.
I'm sorry, he needs a microphone, please.
So RL4 and RL12 were attached. We did not separate them when we processed this because we didn't want to cause any damage to what would have been underneath it. RL12 is this part that runs across the opening. RL4 runs all the way across.
You mentioned a smell when you removed rails. Is this the rail that you're referring to?
Correct.
Sorry, I wasn't near a mic. You mentioned a smell when you removed those rails. Was that the rail you were referring to?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it does seem rather unbelievable that he was distraught given what we know of what he probably did and his behavior since then. So yeah, it is hard to believe.
This would be the orientation as we found it. This would have been the grid opening in RL4 and then the other pieces that were attached to it. Yes.
Detective Lemmy, was this item?
Yes, it was.
Detective Lemmy, thank you. I have no additional questions. The defense may ask you.
Finish, I'll get him back on the stand. Thank you. And sir, when you're ready, if you would just retake the stand for cross-examination.
So let's see what they try to do on cross. But here's some things that are on Twitter right now from
Good
the
afternoon,
courtroom
Detective.
about the
Good afternoon, sir.
jury.
My name is Jamie Brooks. I don't believe we've met, but I represent Adam Montgomery. I also have a few questions for you. I want to go back, though, to what was addressed during the beginning of your direct examination. That's the blue Audi.
Mhm.
You were involved in the processing of that?
Yes, I was.
And you mentioned earlier that there was evidence that was collected from the Audi.
Correct.
And that evidence was also submitted to the lab.
Some of it.
let's talk about that, some of it. And again, how does a piece of evidence get labeled?
We typically have one of the detectives use their own initials, and then we'll start at, if it's the beginning of the project and they haven't labeled anything yet, usually starts around 1 and then works its way up from there.
And when it came to the collection of evidence from the Audi, there were a fair number of JPs, correct?
Yes.
JP standing for?
James Pittman.
And a number of those pieces of evidence collected by Pittman, you decided to have submitted to the lab?
Yes.
And could you please tell the jury what particular items you had submitted to the lab?
If I could review my report.
You most certainly may. Actually, if I were to, are you familiar with something called a crime scene note?
Yes.
And what is a crime scene note?
Well, a crime scene note is typically an overall write-up of the processing of a scene.
I am going to, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
I'm handing you what has been marked 2457 base stamp. Do you recognize that document?
This was not created by myself.
Not created by yourself, but it was a crime scene note from the collection of the Audi.
Yes.
And does that include a list, an exhaustive list of the items collected from the car?
It should.
Would reviewing that help you recall which items you had submitted to the lab?
Probably not, because this wouldn't pertain any of the processing that was done after the collection. There would be a lab submittal that I probably created, and that would list the items that I sent up.
And that lab submittal would assist you?
Yes.
Judge, I think this would be a good time for a break.
Approach.
Perfect timing, Johnny, for doggy. Your doggy knows. That doggy knows. Oh, gosh. Is everybody doing okay? Yeah, I find it curious that the defense is asking him to testify to something he didn't write. Yes, I'm doing fine. Thank you, Janessa. I appreciate it. Janessa, I have some note in my brain to get back to you about something. I think you might have asked a question like in a comment somewhere yesterday or something that I haven't answered. And it's just bothering me right now. So if there's something I haven't addressed, a question that you asked in comments or somewhere, let me know. It is related to this trial, I'm pretty sure. Hey, Marie. I'm hoping that if anybody is not okay, they're just not here.
It's 3026. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
Would looking at it for a minute or two help refresh your recollection?
Only in terms of the actual evidence item numbers, what the physical piece is, I can't tell from here without
Okay.
looking at photos or additional documentation.
So it looks like this has to
So
do
let's
something
stick
with
with the
chain of
numbers.
custody.
Okay.
Having reviewed that report, what items did you have submitted to the lab for potential testing?
119, and these are all JP. 153, 195, 224, 251, 216, 225.
Johnny, that's adorable. Do you want me to show it to the audience at the break? It doesn't dox you, I don't think. But it's totally okay if the answer is no.
So I understand that you may not be able to recognize, for example, specifically what 119 was or 195, but those samples, the JPs collected from the Audi, did some of those include specimens from the floor mat?
The carpeted floor mat that I tested initially with the hemosticks,
Yes.
those were different numbers. Those were JP 120 and 122.
And those were submitted to the lab as well, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Do you recall a cash register receipt?
I do.
Could that have been one of the items submitted to the lab for analysis?
I believe so.
A shoebox?
Yes.
Blue bath towel?
I would have to jog my memory about the bath towel.
Detective, do you still have up there the casing note?
Yes. And sir, what was the evidence item number for the bath towel?
153.
Would you like me to read the listing as far as how Detective Heil listed it?
Just wanted to confirm that a blue bath towel was sent to the submitted for analysis.
So he identified it as towel with unidentified stains. He did not list the color.
Cash register receipt. Do you recall having that submitted?
I do.
A pink sweater, women's?
Yes, sir.
A folder with papers?
Number on that one, sir?
Take a look at 224 and see if that refreshes your recollection.
Yes, sir.
And what is your recollection now?
That was paperwork that was submitted.
A gray bath towel? Does that ring a bell?
Number?
225. See if that refreshes your recollection.
Yes. Towel with unknown stains. He did not reference the color. My photos would show it, though.
I apologize. I didn't hear that last response.
The photos that I took during the processing would also help if you wanted me to clarify the color.
Fair to say, though, that 2 bath towels were submitted for analysis.
Yes, sir.
Finally, do you recall a length of twine?
Yes, sir.
And again, that was collected and submitted to the lab?
Correct.
I now want to turn to your use of blood stain reagents, latent blood stain reagents. In the processing of the Audi, you used hemosticks,
Yes, sir.
Kasselmeyer.
Yes, sir.
You were also involved in the processing of a Chrysler Sebring.
I was involved in that as an assistant to the detective that was processing it.
Detective O'Leary.
Yes, sir.
And when you were there assisting him in the processing of that Sebring, does January 7th of 2022 sound correct?
I would be guessing.
Okay. But he was using Blue Star.
Yes, sir. I remember that.
And that again is another latent blood stain reagent.
It is.
And whenever, regardless of which type of agent was being used, whenever there was a presumptive positive, it was collected.
I can't speak to the Sebring because I didn't process that vehicle. I can only speak to the Audi.
Okay. So when it came to the Sebring, were you there for the Blue Star part of the processing of that vehicle on the 7th or no?
I was there when he blue starred the trunk area.
But it's your understanding that the practice, the practice of the Manchester Police Department is that when there is a presumptive positive, it is something that's preserved.
If we did a swab of an area, we would typically preserve it.
And that's what you did in the processing of the Audi, correct?
Yes, sir.
I believe, as you said on direct, that you preserved the ability to be able to look further at an item if there was a presumptive positive.
Yes, sir.
And again, you want to over collect as opposed to under collect.
I do.
I don't have anything further. Thank you, Detective.
You're welcome, sir.
Anything further?
Just briefly. Detective Lemmy, I just want to follow up with the items that you were asked about on cross-examination by Attorney Brooks. All of those items that you just identified, I think we talked about them on direct as well. Were they from the blue Audi that you processed?
The particular numbers that we reviewed, I believe, were from the Audi.
Was that the same Audi that was covered in mold?
Yes, sir.
And Detective Lemmy, let me ask you this. Do you know where that car was in 2020?
I do not.
How about 2021?
I do not.
How about 2022?
I know it was in the evidence processing bay at Manchester Police.
At some point.
Yeah.
Do you know who that vehicle belonged to?
I know that there was consent forms provided, I believe, by 2 different people. One of them was Donna Demers. I'd have to review my notes to see the other one.
And does Anthony Badero stand out to you, that name?
It doesn't.
Okay. Same questions with the Chrysler Sebring. Do you know where that vehicle was in 2020?
I do not.
2021?
No.
2022?
It had been in the evidence processing bay at Manchester Police.
Thank you, Detective Lemmy.
No recross.
You may step down.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's just about 12:15, so a good time for our lunch break. I remind you, don't discuss the case with anybody. Don't watch any social media. Don't do any independent research. We'll come back in an hour, so please be back at 1:15. All right, 1:15, everybody. Thank you so much.
let's see if they say anything about this evidence mishap when the jurors leave the room. I kind of doubt it. They have a tendency not to address a lot of things at the break of a break. Thank you, cutie pie. You're so sweet. You're going to get a special another special court clip.
Rewrap, or what do you need to do processing wise?
I would ask that Mr. Dido be able to repackage that.
Okay, we're Now I just asked them to do it expeditiously so the court staff can have a break as well. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Anybody who receives a membership, be sure to thank Cutie Pie.
Right out. He's done.
So,
Jamie,
hot mic.
any objection to
So it sounds like the prosecutor was asking if that evidence, that particular evidence, could be re-bagged and marked, or at least remarked. So it sounds like it was just a labeling error, probably human error, but again, it is something that the defense can jump on. So anyway, so just as a recap, what we just saw was, lengthy witness testimony from a detective, Ramy, about the evidence from the ceiling. He's the one that went and cut the ceiling out with other people. He took it down to the processing center and had it processed, and then was probably responsible for getting, for basically the chain of custody, for getting it from one place to another. And it sounds like, at least from where it was stored to the court, there was a little bit of a labeling mishap with some of the evidence. Yeah, and I believe you're right, Baxter, that it was only the outside packaging, not the inside packaging. Like, they will double and triple wrap these things sometimes and just keep the original wrapper on the, main piece of evidence. And, these things happen, and that's why you have to be super detailed and super careful. So, Teresa, this trial is scheduled to last until November 30th. I'm sorry, not November. Till the end of the month. Till the end of the month, I think the general idea is that it was going to be 3 weeks, which makes sense because, they don't have a body, so they have to show all kinds of evidence, and they have to bring in all kinds of witness testimony to compensate for the fact that they don't have right. That might be why she was quiet. And so anyway, they have to compensate for the fact that they do not have a body. And, the only witness that they have to the actual murder is a lying liar who lies and can be impeached 1,000 times over and shown to be very not credible, even though we know that, she doesn't have immunity, but she will be consideration that could be taken away as a result of her lying. So, what she's just basically trying to do is get her best chance at at being at some lighter sentencing, some lighter charges and things like that. But they're basically reserving the right of what to actually do with her, how to finally adjudicate her until she testifies and they're able to confirm that everything she, says is true. Hey, Delaney. So anyway, I will reschedule this. I'm going to take a little break here, but I do want to show you the cute picture that Johnny shared with me. This is how she knows. This is how she knows that that it's break time in trial. It's time to take a break from court. It's time to go, Mom. It's break time. Just sits there and goes, I'm waiting for you. It's very, very cute. Very, very cute. And I needed to make sure that she was okay with me showing that before I did, because it's it's a boy, right? Zorro. Zorro, what a great name. I don't think I've ever met a dog named Zorro. I'm sure there are others, but I don't think I've heard that before. So that is quite adorable, and I don't know if you noticed that I did show earlier that there's a reporter in the courtroom tweeting about how the jury was paying very, very close attention to because his front is white and his face is black. That's really cute. The jury was paying very close attention, and it was very somber in the courtroom. And I know Cutie Pie was saying she thought she heard crying. I was listening for it. I didn't quite hear it, but I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. I would be crying too. So it'll be interesting to see what witnesses they call. I'm pretty sure that the reason that they call these types of witnesses in the morning session is because that's when the jury is more alert and bright. After lunch, people start to fade. They get, they become food zombies. They start wanting to go home, so they're not paying as close attention. So it's easier to follow a narrative from a witness that they're just asking questions. Someone that, like an Anthony Badero or, you have Delaney, that they were quite emotional. The jury usually doesn't show a lot of emotion, so that's interesting. Anyway, before we head out, just take care of yourselves, take deep breaths, have a very happy Valentine's Day. And this special court clip that I just uploaded is for Cutie Pie. It's a classic. It is a classic.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to
can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
You guys, it's the first time I watched that, I thought, this has to be a skit. This can't be real, right? This isn't real, but it's real. He's like, Judd, and I think I gotta play it again. I have to play it again, because watch where the cat looks and how it has like tears in its eyes, like it's embarrassed. Okay, Cutie, I'll upload that for the next session, because I have to download it and then process it and upload it. So anyway, at first I thought it was fake, but the part of what makes it so funny is the guy's accent as he's saying. He sounds so serious. Let's play it again.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings.
Look at the eyes.
You might want to
We're trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
One of the funniest parts for me is how he's like, well, I'm prepared to go forward. I'm prepared. I'm still here. Can we just move forward with this filter? And imagine being that lawyer's client, and your attorney shows up with that cat filter, and it goes viral. I mean, that's what is, for me, it's just the juxtaposition. That's why these court settings are so interesting to me, is because, this is where you come to determine things that could change your life, and the way people show up sometimes, the way people the way people behave sometimes, it's just it's amazing to me, and it's such a contrast in, it's supposed to be the professionalism, and yeah, court Zoom is amazing. Zoom court, I should say. And you can't even get that filter anymore. Man. Ineffective counsel, Your Honor. I object. Ineffective counsel. I want an appeal. It went viral. It tainted my case. I mean, it almost seems like it could be a legitimate objection. Yeah. Anyway, so just one more quick reminder. Of why we're here. I know you know why we're here. But man, when I showed this earlier as they were unboxing all that stuff, woo, it hit me some kind of way, man. You never know what and when something's going to hit you. That is one darn damn cute little girl who deserves so much better. Not because she's cute, but she just happens to be cute, but because she's a freaking human being, a child, an innocent child. And that's why we're here. So, all right. I'll see you later. Please take care of yourselves. And I'll see you on the other side.